On Mother's Day, my own daughter laughed at me in front of her friends. That day, something inside me broke, and what I did next changed both our lives forever. But before I get ahead of myself, my name is Ruth, and I've lived a long enough life to have seen joy, loss, sacrifice, and 1,000 in-between moments. Tell me, where are you watching from right now? I always like to know who's out there listening. It makes me feel less like I'm talking to a screen and more like I'm sharing tea with a friend. All right, now let me tell you my story. Mother's Day had always been a soft spot in my heart. When my daughter was little, she would make me crooked cards with too much glue and glitter that stuck to my hair. She'd hand me dandelions plucked from the yard like they were roses from the Queen's own garden. Those tiny hands, those sticky hugs, oh, how they lit up my life. This year, though, she wasn't little anymore. She was 21, a young woman standing on the cusp of everything I thought I had prepared her for, and I was ready to enjoy a simple day with her. A nice lunch, maybe a stroll, just time together. Because to me, that's what mattered. Not gifts, not money, just us. When she told me she wanted to host a little brunch at the house, I was touched. She even mentioned that a few of her friends might stop by. I thought, how thoughtful. She wanted to celebrate me and even include me in her world of friends. I took extra care that morning. I put on my softest dress, brushed my hair, even dabbed a little lipstick I rarely use these days. I wanted her to feel proud of me, the way I'd always been proud of her. But the moment I walked into that room, something felt off. Her friends were clustered around the dining table, all chatter and laughter. She saw me, and instead of the warm hug I expected, her eyes flicked up and down my outfit in a way I hadn't seen before. A kind of smirk tugged at her lips. "Mom," she said, her voice light but cutting, "you look vintage." The girls at the table burst out laughing. I stood there frozen, the tray of fruit I had carried in shaking slightly in my hands. I tried to smile, tried to make it a joke, but the laughter only swelled. "Oh my gosh," one of her friends added. "It's giving like pioneer woman vibes." They all laughed harder. And my daughter, my flesh and blood, threw her head back and laughed with them. Not a little nervous giggle, not the kind that says, "Oh, come on, don't be mean number." It was full shameless laughter as though humiliating me was the punchline of their whole morning. I wanted to disappear into the carpet. My cheeks burned, my chest tightened, and yet I still forced my lips to curve. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We protect our children even from their own cruelty. I set the tray down and busied myself with pouring juice as though my shaking hands weren't betraying me. I nodded when they made comments about how cute it was that I still used old porcelain cups. I laughed quietly awkwardly when they teased me about never having learned the latest apps or styles. But inside something cracked. Every word, every giggle, every dismissive glance from my daughter dug deeper than any insult I'd ever received, because it wasn't coming from a stranger. It was coming from the very person I had given my life to raising. I didn't storm out, I didn't shout, I didn't scold her in front of her friends. I swallowed at every bitter bite and stayed through the brunch like a polite hostess. I asked about their classes, their dreams, their silly little stories. I nodded and smiled, though my heart was collapsing inside my chest. When the last guest finally left, my daughter barely glanced at me. She was too busy scrolling through her phone, laughing at something on a screen. She didn't notice how quiet I was. She didn't ask if I was all right. She didn't even say thank you for the meal I had prepared. That night, as I washed the dishes alone, my hands trembled. Not from age, but from rage. Not hot, explosive rage, but the cold, sinking kind. The kind that whispers, "She doesn't see you anymore. She doesn't respect you anymore." And that was the moment, standing at the sink with suds clinging to my arms, that I realized something inside me had shifted forever. I wasn't just a mother who had been laughed at, I was a woman who had been betrayed. And though I didn't yet know what I would do, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. After that Mother's Day, I found myself lying awake long into the night. The laughter kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. I'd shut my eyes, hoping for silence, but instead, I'd hear it again, that chorus of young voices. And worst of all, hers mingled among them. It wasn't just the laughter that hurt, it was what it revealed. A truth I'd been too stubborn, or maybe too hopeful to admit. My daughter no longer saw me as someone to honor or cherish. To her, I was just a relic, something to laugh at. And that realization dragged me back through the years like an undertow. When she was born, I was barely more than a girl myself. Her father didn't stick around long. He told me the responsibility was too heavy. that he wasn't ready, so it was just me and her. From the start, every decision I made, every hour I worked, every dollar I saved, it was all for her. I remember working nights at the diner, my feet swollen, my back aching, but still forcing a smile as I served coffee to men who barely saw me as a person. I'd stumble home just as the sun was rising, slip quietly into our small apartment, and kiss her tiny forehead before collapsing into bed. Those hours I worked meant diapers, milk, a roof. Later, when she grew older, the sacrifices changed shape, but never lessened. I passed on opportunities to remarry because I didn't want anyone treating her like an afterthought. I clipped coupons, sewed patches into her clothes, went without new shoes. Myself so she could have the brand she begged for. And as she grew, my dreams shrank to make room for hers. I set aside the idea of going back to school. I gave up the thought of traveling, or even just having a weekend to myself. I poured all of it, all of me, into building her a future. I opened a savings account the day she turned 5. I told myself it was for college. I put away what I could, even when it meant eating soup 3 nights a week. That account became my obsession. I'd watch the numbers creep upward dollar by dollar while reminding myself it was worth every sacrifice. Someday she'd walk across the stage in her cap and gown, and I'd know I had done something meaningful. And then came the wedding dress. She was only 19 when she first showed me the photo on her phone, eyes glowing like they used to when she was little. "Mom, this is the one," she whispered. It was far beyond what we could reasonably afford, but her excitement was contagious. I worked extra shifts, drained part of my small emergency fund, and found a way. When she twirled in that dress in front of the mirror, I thought, this is what love looks like. So much of my life had been measured by her smiles. If she was happy, I was happy. That was the bargain I struck with myself. But after Mother's Day, that bargain felt like a cruel joke. The weight of all those sacrifices pressed down on me, and I began to question what had they amounted to. A daughter who couldn't stand to be seen with me, who mocked me in front of strangers, who didn't recognize or maybe didn't care that everything she had was because I had given up so much. The memories twisted, each one cutting instead of comforting. The long nights at the diner, suddenly, they felt like wasted hours. The patched shoes, the bare cupboards, the endless scrimping and saving, all of it felt like pouring water into a cracked pot. Nothing I gave seemed to hold. And yet a part of me resisted that bitterness because what else could I have done? She was my child, my only child. Loving her had never been a choice. It was an instinct as natural as breathing. Still, I couldn't shake the truth. My devotion hadn't taught her gratitude. Instead, it had taught her to take, to expect, to believe that my sacrifices were nothing more than her due. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and let the years wash over me. The first steps I'd clapped for, the birthdays I'd scraped money together to celebrate, the nights I stayed up with her through sickness and tears, all of it came crashing into me. And then the question surfaced, one I had never dared ask myself before. What about me? What about the woman behind the mother? What about her dreams, her needs, her dignity? Was I not worth something too? For the first time in my life, I let myself sit with that thought. And instead of guilt, I felt a spark of clarity. The laughter on Mother's Day had opened a wound. Yes, but it had also opened my eyes. Something had to change. And this time, the change would not be for her. It would be for me. The days after that, Mother's Day passed in a haze. On the surface, nothing had changed. I still cooked meals, folded laundry, and made polite conversation when she bothered to speak to me. But inside, something had shifted beyond repair. I stopped waiting for her to apologize, stopped hoping she'd look up from her phone and see me. The apology wasn't coming, and even if it did, words would never stitch back the tears she'd ripped open. And in the stillness of that realization, I began to plan. The first thing to go was the dress. It hung in her closet, pristine in its garment bag, as though waiting for a fairy tale that would never come. I'd walk past it while dusting, and each time I did, it seemed to mock me. All those extra shifts, the late nights, the pennies scraped together just to afford a piece of lace and silk. One afternoon when she was out with her friends, I unzipped the bag and ran my fingers over the fabric. For a moment, guilt swelled in my chest. This was her dream dress, the one she had begged for, the one she had twirled in with such delight. But then I remembered the way she had twirled her laughter at me, tossing it around the brunch table like knives. And suddenly the guilt receded. I listed the dress discreetly. It sold within days to a bride who looked at it with the same awe my daughter once had. When the woman pressed the money into my hand, I didn't feel guilt. I felt relief. That dress had been a symbol of my sacrifices. Letting it go was my first act of taking myself back. Next came the college fund. For years, I had treated that account like a sacred altar. I'd sacrificed dinners out, vacations, even basic comforts just to see those numbers climb. It wasn't much by the world's standards, but for me, it represented every ounce of love I could pour into her future. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the bank statement spread before me. My daughter was in her room, music thumping through the walls, laughter from a video call drifting into the hall. I stared at the numbers on the page and thought, she doesn't see what this means. She doesn't care what it cost me. My hands shook as I signed the withdrawal form. When the teller handed me the cashier's check, I felt the weight of decades lift from my shoulders. That money no longer belonged to someone who mocked me. It belonged to me. I used a portion to pay off the lingering debts I'd been too ashamed to admit I had. The rest I tucked away somewhere safe. Not for her, for me, for whatever came next. Once those two threads were cut, the dress, the fund, I knew there was no going back. I began moving quietly, packing small things into boxes I kept hidden, sorting through papers, deciding what mattered enough to take with me. I didn't slam doors or make dramatic announcements. I had learned by then that silence was sharper than any argument. She didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't care. Her world revolved around friends, boyfriends, and social media. I had become background noise in my own home, and perhaps that was what made it easier. I wasn't leaving a daughter who loved me. I was leaving a stranger who had forgotten where she came from. The night before I walked away, I stood in the doorway of her room. She was asleep, her phone still glowing on the pillow beside her. I watched her breathing soft and steady, and for a moment I saw the child she used to be. The one who once clutched my hand in crowded places. The one who used to whisper, "Don't leave me, Mom." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't step inside. I had already left her in my heart the day she laughed at me. This was just the final step. As I turned away, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't running from her. I was walking back to myself. And by the time she realized I was gone, it would already be too late. The morning I left was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The sky outside was gray, the kind of sky that can't decide if it wants to rain or clear. It suited me. I didn't want sunshine mocking my grief, but I didn't want thunder to make a spectacle of it either. I had packed what mattered into 2 suitcases, not much when you consider a whole life lived. Clothes, a handful of photos, the quilt my grandmother had made, a little box of letters I couldn't part with. Everything else, the furniture, the plates, the knickknacks, was just clutter now, things that could stay behind. Ghosts in an empty house. She was still asleep when I wheeled the bags down the hall. I paused at her door the same way I had the night before, listening to her steady breathing. I could have knocked, could have said goodbye. But what would I have said? I hope one day you learn what it means to love without cruelty. No words would have landed. She wasn't ready to hear them, so I walked on. My car was parked at the curb, its trunk already open like a mouth ready to swallow up my past. As I loaded the bags, I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't quite sorrow either. It was something heavier, something nameless, a mixture of exhaustion and resolve, like a soldier who knows the battle is lost, but chooses to retreat with dignity. Before I closed the trunk, I took one last look at the house. The faded paint, the crooked shutters, the garden I had tended year after year while she ran off to parties. Every corner of it held a memory. But those memories no longer felt like mine. They belonged to a version of me that had given until there was nothing left. And I was done with that version. Driving away was the hardest part. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tight I thought I'd leave dents in it. Each street I turned onto felt like a betrayal of the child she once was, of the promise I'd made to always be there. But with each mile, the air seemed a little clearer. The further I drove, the lighter my chest became. The silence in the car was deafening at first. No chatter, no demands, no thumping music through the walls, just me and the road. But soon, that silence became a balm. For the first time in decades, I was alone with myself. I didn't go far, at least not at first. I found a modest rental in a small town 2 hours away, the kind of place where the neighbors still wave at you from their porches, where the grocery clerk remembers your name after the second visit. It wasn't fancy. The paint was peeling, and the heater groaned like an old man clearing his throat. But it was mine. The first night there, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the floor surrounded by boxes. No television, no phone buzzing, no one calling my name. Just the sound of the kettle cooling and the hum of the refrigerator. It was strange, both lonely and liberating. Loneliness because for the first time in 21 years, no one needed me. Liberation because for the first time in 21 years, no one needed me. I could breathe. In the days that followed, I found myself relearning simple joys. Waking up to birdsong instead of slam doors. Cooking a meal just for myself without someone sneering at the old recipes. Taking walks through the park, not rushing back because someone else's schedule dictated my life. At first it felt selfish. A mother's instincts don't die overnight. I'd catch myself thinking, she'll be hungry or did she finish her homework? Before remembering she wasn't there. And I didn't have to carry that weight anymore. Then slowly that guilt melted into something softer, something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Of course, I knew it wouldn't last forever. I knew she'd notice eventually. Notice the missing dress, the emptied account, the empty room. She'd call, or maybe she'd rage, demand answers. But for once, I didn't live in fear of her reaction. For once, I was living for myself. And that, I realized as I drifted off to sleep in my little rented home, was worth every sacrifice I had made, and every sacrifice yet to come. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. I didn't hear from her the first week or even the second. Part of me had expected at least a furious phone call, maybe a string of messages demanding to know where I'd gone. But there was nothing, just silence. She hadn't noticed. Or worse, she had noticed and didn't care. It was the third week when the calls finally started. Missed numbers, voicemails, texts filled with question marks. At first they were short. Where are you? Did you take my dress? What happened to the account? I didn't answer because I knew the truth. What she really wanted wasn't me. It was what I had provided. The dress, the money, the stability I had bled myself dry to give her. That was gone now. And with it, the illusion that she was standing on her own 2 feet. Soon enough, the tone of the messages changed. The anger bled into panic. She had registered for her fall semester, only to discover the tuition payment never went through. She tried to fix it herself, but there was nothing left in the fund. She called the bank, then me, over and over. Her words grew sharper, laced with desperation. Then came the wedding fiasco. The dress I had sold was supposed to be the crown jewel of her engagement. She had shown it off to her friends, even posted pictures of it on social media, boasting about her dream wedding. Now, with the dress gone and the money drained, her fiancé began asking questions. Arguments followed. He wasn't cruel, but he was practical. A man in his early 20s doesn't want to shoulder debts that were never his. From what I heard later, the engagement unraveled faster than she could patch it back together. The friends who once sat at my table laughing at me, they slipped away too. College girls are quick to scatter when the fun disappears. They didn't want to hang around someone who could no longer host brunches, buy concert tickets, or play the part of the glamorous bride-to-be. By the time a month had passed, she was alone. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall. Not at first. A mother's heart doesn't harden that easily. I read every message, every voicemail, my fingers itching to call back and soothe her like I always had, to tell her we would figure it out, that I would fix it. Just like I had fixed everything else for the last 21 years. But then I would hear that laughter in my head again, the laughter that had broken me. And I'd remember she hadn't just made a mistake. She had chosen to belittle me, to humiliate me in front of strangers after everything I had given her. No, this wasn't about punishing her. It was about teaching her something she had never learned. That love is not a free, endless fountain you can drink from without giving anything back. Weeks turned into months. I built a small rhythm in my new life. Gardening on the balcony, reading in the evenings, chatting with the kind woman next door who brought me muffins when she baked too many. I found myself smiling more often, and yet every so often my phone would light up with her number. Sometimes I'd listen to the voicemails. Her voice grew smaller each time. The arrogance drained away, replaced by pleading. Mom, please just talk to me. Mom, I don't know what to do. Mom, I'm sorry. That last one nearly broke me. I sat with the phone pressed to my chest, tears slipping down my cheeks. I wanted so badly to call her back, to say, I forgive you, come home. But then I remembered. If I went back too soon, if I patched it all up again, nothing would change. She'd slip back into her old ways, and I'd disappear back into the wallpaper of her life. She had to feel the weight of her choices, just as I had borne the weight of mine for over 2 decades. The breaking point came one evening in late autumn. My phone rang, and when I saw her name, something in me hesitated differently this time. I answered. Her voice cracked as soon as she heard mine. Mom, Mom, it's me. I know who it is, I said softly. There was silence on the line, then a sob. I need you. And for the first time, I felt the balance shift. She wasn't calling for the money or the dress or the convenience. She was calling for me. But I wasn't the same woman she had laughed at months ago. I wasn't the servant who bent over backwards to fill every need, no matter how small. So before I said another word, I reminded myself this conversation would not be on her terms. It would be on mine. When I finally agreed to meet her, it wasn't in the house we once shared. I chose a quiet cafe in the town where I now lived. Neutral ground, a place that didn't echo with memories. I got there early, as I always do. My hands curled around a cup of tea, steadying me as I watched the door. And when she walked in, my breath caught. She looked smaller somehow, not in height, of course, but in spirit. Her shoulders hunched, her eyes ringed with shadows, her confidence chipped away. Gone was the young woman who had laughed so easily at my expense. In her place was someone who looked lost. She spotted me and hurried over. Mom. Her voice cracked on the word as though she wasn't sure she was allowed to use it anymore. I nodded toward the chair across from me. Sit. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with things unsaid. Finally, she blurted, Why did you do it? Why did you leave me when I needed you most? I set my cup down slowly, giving myself time. Then I met her eyes. You think that was when you needed me most? Number. You needed me most when you were laughing at me in front of your friends and I was there. You just didn't see me. Her face crumpled. Mom, I held up a hand. Let me finish. My voice was calm but firm, steadier than I felt inside. For 21 years, I gave you everything. My time, my money, my health, my dreams. I went without so you could have. I made sure you never felt the hunger or loneliness I carried. And in return, I asked for respect, not perfection, not constant gratitude, just respect. And on the day meant to honor mothers, you laughed at me like I was a joke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't mean it like that. You did, I interrupted gently. Maybe you didn't realize how deep it would cut, but you meant it in the moment. And your friends meant it, and you let it happen. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was trying to impress them, and I thought. She broke off with a sob. I thought you'd understand. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. Understand being humiliated? No. I don't think any mother truly understands that. Silence stretched between us again, broken only by her sniffles. Then softly she asked, Why the dress? Why the money? You knew I needed those this time. I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp. Exactly. You needed them, but they were never yours. They were mine. My sacrifices, my labor, my love turned into lace and numbers on a page. And when you made it clear you didn't value me, why would I leave them behind for you to waste? She stared at me, stunned, as though she'd never thought of it that way. Do you hate me? She whispered. I shook my head. No, hate is easy. What I feel is harder. I love you, but I cannot let you treat me like I'm disposable. Love doesn't mean letting yourself be walked over. Her tears came harder then, the kind of crying that shakes the whole body. For a moment I almost reached out, almost pulled her into my arms like I used to when nightmares woke her as a little girl. But I stopped myself. She had to feel this, sit with this. She looked up at me, eyes swollen and red. Can I fix it? I sighed, leaning back. That's not a question for me. That's a question for you. Respect isn't given because you ask for it. It's earned every day in the way you treat people, especially the people who love you. We sat there for what felt like hours. She told me about the broken engagement. The classes she couldn't pay for, the friends who had drifted away. Every word was laced with regret. I listened, but I didn't rush to solve it. I didn't open my wallet or offer to make calls. That was the old me. The new me just nodded, letting her speak her truth while I guarded mine. Finally I stood. I have to go. Panic flashed in her eyes. Wait, don't leave me again. I softened just a fraction. I'm not leaving. Not the way I did before, but I'm also not coming back to who I was. If you want me in your life, it will be as your mother, yes. but also as a woman who deserves respect, not as your servant, not as your punchline. She nodded through tears, though whether she truly understood, I couldn't say. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt both heavier and lighter. Heavier with the weight of all that was said and unsaid. Lighter because for the first time I hadn't bent myself into pieces to make her comfortable. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first lesson she'd ever really learned from me. Walking out of that cafe, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like some heroine who had won a battle. No, what I felt was complicated. Like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring at the horizon, not knowing whether the view is beautiful or terrifying. That's the truth people don't tell you. Reclaiming yourself doesn't always feel good. It feels necessary. It feels raw. And necessary and raw will carry you further than comfort ever could. In the days after our meeting, my daughter called more often. Sometimes just to hear my voice. Sometimes to tell me she was trying to manage her bills, trying to mend friendships, trying to grow up. I didn't rush to praise her. I didn't swoop in to fix the mess. I listened. And then I went back to my garden or my tea or my book. For once, my life wasn't orbiting hers. And let me tell you, after 2 decades of circling her every need, standing still in my own center felt strange. Strange, but right. Do I forgive her? Yes, in my heart I do. She's my child, and a mother's love is stubborn. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending those years of sacrifice cost me nothing, or that her laughter didn't leave scars. Forgiveness means I release the weight, but I don't hand it back for her to use again. Will she and I ever be as close as we once were? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. That's not the story I'm living anymore. My story isn't about being everything for someone else. My story now is about being something for myself. If you're listening to me right now, especially those of you who've given your lives to raising children, you know what I mean. We mothers, we give and give. And somewhere along the way, we forget we're people too. We forget we deserve respect, joy, dignity. And when that's stripped away by laughter, by neglect, by cruelty, we have to ask the hardest question of all. What about me? That question saved me. I don't tell you this to paint myself as a saint or a villain. I tell you this because life is messy and choices aren't clean. Selling the dress, taking the money, leaving the house, those weren't pretty choices, but they were mine. For once, they were mine. And if my daughter learns from the fallout, if she grows into someone who respects not just me, but herself and others, then maybe my leaving will have been the greatest gift I could give her. If not, well, at least I finally gave something to myself. So, here I am, in a little rented home with peeling paint, a few plants on the windowsill, and peace in my chest. I don't need grandeur. I don't need applause. I need the quiet dignity of knowing I didn't let myself disappear, because at the end of the day, love without respect isn't love at all. Thank you for sitting with me through this. If my story stirred something in you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've lived something similar, I'd like to hear that too. We may be scattered across the world, but we're not as alone as we sometimes feel. Take care of yourselves truly, because if you don't, no one else,